ETHOS Explorers, my name is Mia, and today I am at Indiana University of South Bend, and we are going to learn about some of the science programs that they have here. Let's go investigate! Today we are here with Dr. Henry Scott, who is a physics professor here at IUSB, and he is also the Associate Dean for the School of Natural Sciences. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, welcome.
So can you share a little bit about what you do here at IUSB?
So my role has changed over the years. I came to IUSB as a professor where I kind of balance some teaching along with research, and we very much try to have our research be something that includes students, so that's kind of part of teaching too. But that's our normal distribution of duties, is some teaching and research along with service. And then after a few years I became the chairperson for the Department of Physics and Astronomy. That didn't change my role too much. I still taught, I still did research, but then I was doing a little more administrative work, and then in the last year I've become an associate dean. And so now I pretty much only do administrative work, although this summer I'm actually teaching a course, and I still do some advising with students, and of course I work with my colleagues across the entire campus.
Cool. So how long have you been teaching for?
So I came in 2003, so I'm over 20 years now, which is kind of hard to believe, but that's true.
Yeah, that's awesome. So can you tell me a little bit about the programs that IUSB offers for students?
Okay, so in the School of Natural Sciences, we have several departments, and that includes some of the traditional bench-style sciences: biology, chemistry, biochemistry, physics. And then within those departments, there are some subfields. Like from physics, we offer astronomy and quite a few geology, earth science style courses. But then in the school, we also have the Department of Mathematics, which covers, of course, math, which is integral to all of the sciences. So they all work together quite well.
What are the different types of opportunities that students have if they want to continue research here at IUSB?
Oh, I'm really glad you asked that. So we have a relatively small campus. So even at the undergraduate level, they will have some opportunities to do research with faculty. We take a lot of pride in that. And that's one of the things I think really is one of the to me, the biggest selling points for why coming here would be attractive, is that the students can really work with faculty and get involved in doing research and make the leap from learning things that we really already know the answers. We're trying to help students sort of understand why there's a best way to solve a problem, because we already know. That's useful. But what is more interesting and often drives us and leads to more exciting career paths is figuring out how to learn things we don't already know. And that's what research is all about. Getting exposure, collecting data, doing new analyses, modeling, visualizing. That's what is most exciting, I think, for most students.
So students would have opportunities to be and work in a lab like the one that we're in?
Absolutely. Yeah. And in most of the departments, it's actually required that students have to do that. It's a component of the requirements to graduate. It's having some research exposure. And then at the end of every year, we have an undergraduate research conference. That's my favorite day of the year, where students present the work they've been doing. And some give talks, some give posters, but it's just a whole day spent having students share the research they've done. And then those students often go on to graduate schools to get PhDs or doctorates. Some end up going to medical fields, some just go straight to work in industry. But those are the skills that typically really set students apart for an employer, when they can show that they know how to do new things. It's not just a matter of doing the things that we do all the time, but learning new things is especially valuable.
What would you say is your favorite part of science that you get to do when you are working with students?
Well, I think you hit it right there. It's the working with students. That's the part that makes us the most satisfying. Doing science can lead to discovery and understanding new things, which that is really fantastic. In my experience, that's relatively rare, where there's something that I'm like, the new piece of knowledge in and of itself is what makes it so exciting. Generally, it's the ongoing learning, but again, what I find most satisfying is working with students and giving them the tools to start answering questions on their own and experience the process of not just learning things that are being taught to you, but learning things that aren't already known.
That's awesome. What would be your favorite thing to teach?
So I've taught a fairly broad set of courses. So my background is kind of in between physics and earth sciences. It's shifted over the years. I think now I'm more on the physics side of what I do. So currently my favorite course to teach is the physics of sound, which is a general education course. It works for students in the health sciences who might be interested in speech-language pathology as a career path. But over the years, I've taught quite a few earth science courses. For a while, I taught a geology of the national parks course. That I enjoyed very much because I could use that to justify travel myself, to go visit national parks, to get my own experiences there. And it was especially fun to see students through that course. They might have had an interest in landscapes and parks in general when they came in, but some didn't. And then over the years, they reach out and send pictures when they've gone to see the parks themselves. So I really enjoyed that. Plus, to understand the national parks, there's a lot of things that I find particularly fascinating. Volcanoes and where the crust is being pulled apart and how new landscapes form and change over time.
So you mentioned volcanoes, which our ETHOS Explorers that are watching this actually created their own mini volcanoes. So I was wondering if they wanted to learn more about volcanoes, what area of science would that fall under?
So it's really broad, and the answer might be surprising. The most obvious thing would be geology or geosciences. They're named different things at different universities, how people like to frame it. But as a student, you can approach understanding volcanoes or really anything that deals with the geosciences from many different perspectives. And that could be the biological sciences, because there's quite a bit in understanding life and how that's evolved over time. Chemistry is really key. If you're interested in rocks or minerals, understanding how those are formed, that's really chemistry ultimately. And then physics as well, because much of what we find interesting about the geosciences is how landscapes form and why there are deposits or volcanoes or earthquakes where they are. And that all involves the forces and flow of energy through the planet. That's the study of physics. But if they studied chemistry, physics, biology, any of those would be really good backgrounds with some interest and perhaps a little research experience to then go on to graduate study that might be more specifically in volcanology. That's the study of volcanoes specifically. And then that would lead to most likely a doctorate and then a research path, either at a university or perhaps working for the United States Geological Survey.
I didn't realize that there was that much that went into volcanoes. Do you have any other fun or interesting facts that you know about volcanoes?
Well, I mean, there's like nothing about volcanoes that's not interesting, right? There's the threat. Some volcanoes are incredibly dangerous, infrequent, but when they do erupt can be devastating for entire cities. They can be associated with things that might generate tsunamis, so a lot of risk associated with some volcanoes. Others are just very pretty, even when they're dormant or no longer going to erupt. They might still have landscapes that are snow-capped if they're certain types and really tall and fun to climb and explore, just beautiful. Others, like the Hawaiian Islands, aren't especially dangerous. They're very different from the type that might really explode and take out a city. But they're still interesting to study, and they completely dominate the landscapes.
Where around the world would you find volcanoes? In what places?
The framework we typically use to understand where you'd find volcanoes is plate tectonics, which we started to understand pretty well in the 1960s into the 1970s. So that's a while now. That's still a pretty recent field. And that's understanding that the outer part of Earth is primarily a rigid shell that's cracked up. And those pieces, like a cracked eggshell, are moving. And the reason they are moving is because of heat deep inside the planet that's flowing toward the surface. And as those pieces of that rigid outer part of Earth interact, in some locations, which we understand pretty well, you could predict where you'd expect to find volcanoes. So the really explosive type, they tend to form where the crust or the lithosphere beneath the oceans is sinking back down inside Earth. Because as it goes down, it takes some water and carbon dioxide that are locked up in the minerals, and at some depth they break down and they can help produce magmas. Other places can occur where from much deeper inside Earth there's excess heat that is flowing upward, and it can cause some melting as it rises. And so there are areas we could predict to find volcanoes like Hawaii, or in parts of the Southwest where the crust is pulling apart, you can get some volcanoes there too.
It's really cool. Our ETHOS Explorers also really love space. So I wanted to ask, what is your favorite thing to study about space?
Well, if you're thinking about volcanoes, then maybe some moons that are kind of interesting. So there's a moon of Jupiter called Io that is the most volcanically active body in the solar system. So that's a little surprising because that's so far out, but it's covered with volcanoes and really active. There are some that have water volcanoes or other materials that are coming up that are worlds that have icy shells on the surface, but maybe have oceans down below. And in some cases, they erupt. Neptune's Triton has had observations of volcanic activities, but it's a really cold, frozen world, but it's had volcanic eruptions.
If you could live on any planet, what planet would you choose
Earth.
And why? Other than Earth.
Well, if it's to live there, I like Earth because it's so hospitable. If I could explore and I knew it were safe, like where would I want to see? So Mars is attractive simply because that's feasible. Perhaps not for me, but like my children could potentially explore Mars. That's exciting. We could imagine in the next few decades being able to get people to Mars. I would love to see Venus. Now, that's much more difficult. It's hard to foresee the technological advancements necessary to go to the surface of Venus and be able to actually look at it, because the atmosphere is so dense and hot and inhospitable, but it's fascinating. So I'd like to see that. I'd love to go to, if I could go to a moon, I'd like to see Saturn's Titan. To see the lakes of hydrocarbons would be pretty great, or volcanoes on Io. I'd want to go to any place I possibly could. They're all different worlds. Every one of them are so interesting and unique. To see them with my own eyes would be incredible.
Is there anything else that you would like to share about what you do or what IUSB offers?
Yeah, I think it would be to be open to learning different things. It can be really hard as a student to understand or to appreciate how much interplay there is between all the types of knowledge one can gather. So chemistry, physics, biology, astronomy, they're all very closely related. People working in those fields like to talk to each other to get different insights, because the way the world works is quite complicated. And we're just trying to observe it to make better sense of it and to make predictions. But where things get really interesting is when we don't already know the answers. And very often it turns out that requires knowing something that you don't think you need to know, and then having the mathematical tools and the ability to analyze the data and visualize it. It's a very broad set of skills that prove to be really valuable. So the advice I try to give to students, and I try to take myself as much as I can, is to take it all in. It is very hard to think, I want to know this one thing, so this is exactly what I'm going to study. You want to study as much as you can, and to appreciate all of it, because it's about understanding and learning how things work and ultimately making predictions so that you can make sense of a new situation.
I love that, and thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for being here today and teaching us all about science and IUSB and what you do as a professor.
Well, thank you very much for coming. It's really great talking with you.
Thanks.